Hi, and welcome back to the Virtual Elephant YouTube channel. I'm Chris Muchler, Principal Enterprise Architect and VCDX 257. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to complete 3 of the more common Day 2 operations once you have a Red Hat OpenShift environment. I'm going to show you how to configure the environment for LDAP and authenticate different users and teams to be able to access the cluster and the environment, as well as being able to inject a custom SSL cert and be able to configure the environment to leverage an internal Harbor or other container repository that you're going to need to be able to pull containers for as you deploy your applications. So let's jump in and let's get started. Now that I've installed VCF 5.2.1 and upgraded the Home Lab as per the VCF series that I recently published, the next thing to do is to start deploying Kubernetes in its various forms and platforms that I like to run. Now this includes running Kubernetes via open source and configuring the cluster with kubeadmin, deploying clusters with Rancher, making sure that I have VKS or vSphere Kubernetes service running on top of VCF, as well as leveraging Red Hat OpenShift within the Home Lab. Now, I like to do this so that I can document and understand the differences between the different Kubernetes platforms, as well as be able to understand how to help customers and clients that I work with better. So you can see here that I have a brand new OpenShift cluster that I've just deployed within the last hour inside of the environment. And so we see the login page here. And so what we're going to first do is actually log into the environment using the temporary kubeadmin user. And you can see here that we get the UI screen right here from the start with all of the different OpenShift components that come deployed from the platform perspective for you initially. Now, there are a number of things that we're going to want to configure and get running before we would actually turn this over to an end user to be able to deploy their applications. And that's what we're going to be going through, some of those first key things here in this video. So before we move on, one of the things I do want to call out is that I do have here in this CRT window that I do have a bootstrap server, and I've already captured and copied over the kubeadmin config file for this, and I do have the OC CLI command for using the CLI within this bootstrap server. So if we go here and we do OC get nodes, we can see our environment. We have our 3 controllers and our 5 workers, and we also have kubectl installed as well, so we can do a kubectl get nodes. You can see the same information is coming out of that command here. So we are going to be leveraging the CLI to be able to do some of the configuration for LDAP, some of the configuration for the SSL certificates, as well as configuring a Harbor repository that we want to be able to pull images from within the environment. So I do have this bootstrap server. We're going to be using that later on in the video. Now, if you see here, there is a banner at the top. It says that we are logged in and that we need to configure cluster OAuth configuration to allow others to be able to log in. So I will say, and I'll show it here on the screen, that I am documenting what you need to do from a Red Hat OpenShift perspective to be able to run the different components of my project SignalWave GitHub repo. So in that GitHub repo, you'll see that there is a README for OpenShift. I encourage you to go through the commands that are in there. That's what we're going to be doing in this video. So if you're trying to replicate this in your own environments, you can pull that README and be able to execute these same commands. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click over here on this. It's going to take us to the OAuth details for the configuration of the cluster. You can see we do not yet have an identity provider, so we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to select LDAP. I already have the LDAP server set up and running within my environment. And so we're going to go ahead here and we're going to pre-populate a lot of this information. So I'm giving it a name, LDAP provider. This is what's actually going to be shown inside of your UI screen when you go to log in. So we could actually change this if we wanted to have it be more descriptive and say something like, organization name or what have you. But we have our URL, which we're pointing to our OU. So we see LDAP01 home.virtualelephant.com on port 389. We can see our bind DN that we're using with our Kates-service. Okay, and then we're going to specify here the password that we specified when we set up our LDAP. Now we're going to change one of these attributes. So for the ID, we're actually going to be using UID. Our preferred username is going to stay UID CN. For the name, we're not going to put anything in here for the email, and we're not going to touch the CA file. So we're going to go ahead here and hit add. And again, all of this is documented in that README file. So now that it's reconfiguring it, we need to go into our secure CRT window, and we're going to follow the commands that I have outlined in the README file to be able to finish configuring the LDAP integration with Rancher. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually create a secret. So this we're going to do with OC create secret. We're going to tell it generic. And then we're going to give it a name, LDAP bind secret. And then we're going to say our namespace is OpenShift config. And then we are going to tell it from literal equals bind password. And then here you're going to specify your bind password in clear text. So I'm going to blur this out, but just put in your password here that you've leveraged. So now we've created the secret. We'll clear the screen. Okay, so now we're going to check the authentication provider. Afterwards, we're going to do an OC get OAuth cluster -o YAML. And we're going to check that it looks good. So we see insecure false. So we actually do need to change that. And so we're going to, because in my environment, I need this to be true in order to log into the environment. So we're going to do that next. So we're going to come down here to insecure. We're going to change this to true. All right, so now that we've set the insecure to be true, the next thing that we're going to do is actually authenticate a set of users, or rather a group, to be able to log in as cluster admin. Now, I've already created these files and I show them to you in the README, but I'm going to go into this folder called LDAP config, where I have this bind password file, as well as this group sync YAML file that we're going to be using. Now, my LDAP server has a team called DevOps-team that has 3 users in it: DevOps-user1, user2, and user3. And we want to grant to them cluster admin rights. So we're going to go ahead and do that now by doing OC admin groups sync. And then we're going to say sync config equals, in the name of this file, group sync.yaml. And then we're going to do confirm. So this is going to go out and actually sync to the LDAP server and grab that information. Oh, it's groups. OC admin groups sync, and then the sync config. So you can see here it grabbed our DevOps team, and then to validate it, we can do an OC get group DevOps team -o YAML. And we can see here that it went and grabbed it from our LDAP server, and that here are the 3 users, 1, 2, and 3. And so now what we want to do is actually grant them admin or cluster admin rights. So we do this OCADM policy, add cluster role to group, okay, and then cluster admin, and then DevOps-team. And so now it's added it to the entirety of the cluster. Now, if you wanted to do this on a namespace basis, you could do that, and the command for that is in the README file. So now once this is done, now we should actually be able to log in using one of those DevOps team members into the Red Hat OpenShift cluster. So we'll come back to our UI. We will log out, and now you see our LDAP provider is here. So we're going to click on LDAP provider. We're going to do DevOps user 1, enter our password. And now we've logged in as DevOps user 1. You see here in the upper right part of the screen, and you can see we have the administrator as well as the developer ability within a cluster. So now we've configured LDAP. So the next thing that you might want to do is actually be able to configure the nodes to accept a wildcard certificate that you might have generated for your organization. I have a wildcard cert that I'm using within my environment, and it is attached to my Harbor repo for when I go and download containers that I've created as part of any of my given projects. So we want to go ahead and we want to actually add that wildcard certificate to the Red Hat OpenShift nodes. So we're going to come back to our Bootstrap server. I have a window or a file folder here, certificates. You can see within this certificates folder that I have this bundle cert that I've generated, home.virtualelephant.com.bundle.crt. So we're going to actually inject that into the cluster to use it. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a config map that points to it. So we're going to do OC create config map. You can give it a name, home VE-CA. We're going to go from file equals, and this is important, CA bundle.crt. Okay, so you don't want to misspell that. ca-bundle.crt equals, and then the path. So it's home deploy certificates, and then home virtual elephant com.bundle.crt. And then we're going to tell it the namespace is OpenShift config. So now we've created that config map. So the next thing is to actually patch the cluster proxy to use this custom certificate. So to OC patch proxy /cluster type merge. And then I am going to copy this one just so that I don't mistype anything. This JSON bit here. Okay, and you can see this in the README. All right, so now we're going to patch it. So it's patched it. So now we want to validate that it's there. So we're going to go OC get config map, and then the config map name that we gave it in the OpenShift config namespace, and then we're going to output it in YAML. So what you want to look here at the top is you want to look for under data that it does say CA bundle.crt, and then it looks like it's got your certificates in it from the file. So we look good there. So now we're going to go ahead and make sure that the patch was actually applied. So we're going to OC get proxy /cluster OYAML, and we're going to grep for trusted CA. So we can see here that it is using the config map that we've created, so we're good there. And so now we've configured the SSL certs to be leveraged. So the next thing to do is to actually configure the environment to actually be able to pull from the custom Harbor repo that I'm running within the environment as well. So we are going to be creating what's called a pull secret. Okay, and so this is an old version of it, so we're going to delete that. But what we're going to do is we're going to create this secret, and then we are going to extract the secret into a JSON file that we then edit for what we need. So here we go. I'm just going to paste this one. So we are giving it some information, including a password for the Docker repository, harbor.home.virtualelephant.com, a username and password. So I'll be blurring that out. Okay, and then we are going to actually go and let's run this as a separate command. So here you go. So OpenShift config. So now it's created the secret. So now we want to actually pull it out into a JSON file that we are going to be editing. So we're going to edit this pull secret. Now this file is all one line. So we're going to actually be modifying it so that it actually looks readable first. And this is just so that I make sure that I've got everything correct. So we're going to copy these. And again, this example is in README file. Okay, so now we've added our Harbor. We've given it our authentication token. And we show you how to create that here in the README file. But we're going to go ahead and save this. So now that we have the pull secret, we're going to actually just do OC set data secret / pull secret, and then own OpenShift for namespace config from file .docker config JSON equals pull secret.json. So now we've done that. So we should be able to actually now successfully pull a container from the repo. And I've actually done this in the past as I was learning how to do it. So we're going to do this OC run Harbor test, and we're going to give it the image name, which is Harbor home virtualelephant.com /VE lab /Cisco SNMP client debug. Doesn't matter what you choose here, just something within your environment that you know you can pull. This one just goes and pulls this little like Python that doesn't do anything, lets me just debug Python scripts. So we should be able to do an OC get pods and see that it's running. We can do an OC describe pods / harbor test, and we'll see down here that it was successfully pulled the image from home.harbor.virtualelephant.com. So now we've configured our Red Hat environment to be able to pull containers or images off of a custom Harbor repo that we're running that has its own SSL Wildcard certificate applied to it. And we've been able to log into the OpenShift environment leveraging LDAP now. So we can start granting different permissions within the platform for our different users and teams that are going to be using our Red Hat OpenShift environment. So these are some of the very first day one actions or tasks that I perform when I deploy Red Hat OpenShift. From there, then I start to deploy other things, shared services within the environment to get ready to be able to deploy my full project SignalWave stack within the environment. I encourage you to check out the GitHub repo, github.com/virtualelephant. And from there, you can find the project SignalWave repo where all of the commands that I executed today are in that readme-OpenShift markdown file so that you can follow along and modify them for your environment to be able to operationalize running Red Hat OpenShift within your environments. Now from here, some of the things that you might want to do next is start playing with the alert manager, configuring Slack integrations. You're going to want to probably add a CSI within the environment so you can start to leverage persistent storage for Grafana and Prometheus and InfluxDB. And we're going to be doing all of those things in the next video on OpenShift. So if you're enjoying this content, please make sure that you subscribe to the Virtual Elephant YouTube channel, you turn on notifications, and you hit that like button. Please be sure to leave me a comment below and let me know what you thought. If there's other things around Red Hat OpenShift that you'd like to learn or see me work on, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to add them to my backlog. As always, feel free to reach out to me on X @ChrisMuchler, and I look forward to talking to you next time.